Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate how to do a pre-flight inspection on the Great Lakes here. I like to start up on the wing, and I start in the front cockpit, and there's two things that I want to check. First of all, this airplane has an inverted fuel system, which means there is besides the main wing tank, there is a separate header tank that's up underneath the dash here. And you've got 4 fuel lines that gravity feed into this header tank. So what I want to check is I want to look under here, and I can actually see the fuel fittings and verify there's no leaks, and I can also see the attach points for the tank, and that way I can verify that they look secure. The other thing that I want to look for in this front cockpit, especially if I'm going to be flying solo, I want to actually fasten the harness. It's a 5-point harness with several straps that if they're not fastened, they could dangle down and interfere with the rudder cables or the flight controls. And also, if you're doing inverted flight, you'll be surprised to see the straps hanging out of the front pit, which is disconcerting. So those are the two things that I want to check in the front pit, the header tank and the straps. Moving back to the rear pit, which is the PIC spot, first and foremost, on the two Great Lakes that we have, the ignition key stays in the airplane. So it's important to make sure the mags are indeed off before you start your pre-flight inspection and get near that propeller. Also, the switches and verifying that they're off. We've already done our lights checks. We've turned the master on, verified the beacon, and all of the lights work. So now the switches are all off and the mixture's lean. So we're set in the rear cockpit. There's no gust lock to worry about, so you don't have to worry about taking a gust lock off before we do the pre-flight inspection. One other thing in this airplane for the rear pit is there is a little pouch on the side to hold items, but there's no way to secure those items. So if you're doing aerobatic flight, you want to make sure there's absolutely nothing in that side pouch. There is a glove box with a spring-loaded lid that is suitable for holding things. It's up here in the front. That is suitable for holding things even for aerobatic flight because the spring-loaded lid keeps it closed, but never in the side pouch if you do an aerobatic. So we verified that there's nothing loose in there as well. Okay, we want to take the cover off of the aerobatic sight. That's just designed to keep you from poking your eye out, and the aerobatic sight is so that when you're doing aerobatics you can look off to the left and you've got a pitch reference. So that's the purpose of that. So we'll take this off and we'll set it inside. And then coming around this way, this is a fabric airplane, so we're checking to make sure there's no rips, no tears, no stitching that's coming undone. We're also making sure not only that the baggage door is secure, but there's nothing loose in here that if we're doing aerobatic flight that'd be banging around. Like you wouldn't want a fuel cup like this in there. In this case, it's empty. If you're doing non-aerobatic flight, of course you can put things in the baggage area, but for aerobatic flight you want to make sure that that has nothing more than soft items like rags or something like that, but nothing hard like this that would bang around in flight and become a projectile. And then we'll make sure that these are secure and in line with the wind. Also, we're checking the fabric on the bottom of the airplane, rips, tears, stitching that's coming undone as well. In addition to that, you also want to check for foreign objects in the tail of the airplane. Especially since this is an aerobatic airplane, things can come out of your pocket in flight, like chapstick or GoPro camera mounts, things like that. Those are all things we have pulled out of the tail of airplanes like this. They end up in the tail where they can then jam the flight controls because you got pulleys and cables back there, and the last thing you want to do is be in the middle of an aerobatic maneuver and find that your controls are jammed. So during the pre-flight, how we check that is we actually tap the belly like this, and we just work our way back to the tail of the airplane. If there is a foreign object back there, you will hear it and you will feel it because it will bounce off the bottom and then hit again, and it will be very obvious. And then this is the breather that comes off of the engine for the crankcase breather. And the reason it's in the tail instead of the nose like it is in most airplanes is because it's an aerobatic airplane. If you were doing something like a hammerhead like this, oil would be dripping out of the breather tube if it was located up front. So instead it's in the tail, and there's a kind of a loop or a trap to prevent oil from leaking out of the breather tube. Nonetheless, when you come see the airplane in the hangar, you'll first open the hangar doors, you may see a small puddle that's underneath this, and that's not uncommon and it's normal. The rudder cable, no damage, no fraying. These braces for the horizontal stabilizer should be checked for security of attachment. You've got cotter pins here and here, a lock nut here. You've got a lock nut here, cotter pin, cotter pin. In addition, you want to give these a good strum. That's how it should feel and how it should sound. And that tells you that it has normal tension here. Moving to the top, we'll do the same thing here. And that's got normal tension as well. Looking in here, the spar for the horizontal stabilizer, the Great Lakes have a history of cracks in that area. So there is an airworthiness directive for repetitive inspections there. I always like to look in there. I'm not sure if I would see a problem or not, but it makes me feel good. Coming around this way, we're looking at the the elevator hinges. I see a cotter pin here. I see a cotter pin here. There's no binding and no looseness. Same thing with the rudder. We've got our rudder hinges, 3 of them. And because this is an aerobatic airplane, you also want to try lifting up a bit on the rudder to verify that the retainer clips on the rudder hinges are doing their job. Also, we're looking at the tail wheel, not only that the tire has normal inflation and that there's no cords showing or other issues like you would typically look for in a tire, but we're also looking to make sure that this clutch is locked, because that's what provides tail wheel steering. As you move the rudder pedals and the rudder moves, these chains and springs operate the tail wheel through this clutch mechanism. Now this clutch mechanism is designed to unlock to allow the tail wheel to swivel for tight turns on the ground. But normally it should be locked. And if it's not locked, you don't have tail wheel steering. If there's damage to the clutch inside, that could cause that to happen. So that's why I'm checking to make sure it's locked. And by locked, I mean that this bracket stays locked with the tail wheel when I move the rudder. If we were to push the side of the airplane and unlock this clutch, then this would become free swiveling and this would be unlocked, and that's normal. But with the tail wheel lined up with the rudder, it should be locked. So that looks good. We'll check for the same things here and here. Elevator hinges here. We'll check the braces here and here. And the rudder cable looks good there as well. Now, from back here, it's the best location to have a look at the top of the wing. Gives you the best view. So again, you're looking for any problems with the fabric or anything that doesn't look right. On the left side, you can probably see the fuel cap, which we'll inspect in a moment. And on the right side, you can see that little, what looks like a post sticking up. That's the fuel vent, and it has a check valve in it for inverted flight. So that's where the fuel vent is located. Coming around the side, we're checking for the same kinds of things on the side of the airplane on the right side. Now we get to the ailerons, and this airplane has 4 ailerons. So the top aileron is slaved to the lower aileron through this right here. So first of all, we'll check and make sure there's no binding. And we'll also check to make sure, we'll pull fore and aft to check the bearings, the hinges rather, on the ailerons. We'll also check side to side, and that all looks good. We'll do the same thing on the upper aileron, fore and aft, side to side. There's a little bit of play here, but that's not out of limits. And then we want to check the rod end bearings here for play. And the way we do that is to try to move the ailerons against each other like this, and I don't feel any play at all. On some airplanes you might feel a little bit of play, and that's okay, but you don't want to feel excessive play. Coming around this way, no damage to the wingtips. And just to demonstrate the oleo struts, you can see how much give there is to the oleo struts, which is one of the things that makes this airplane so easy to land. We're checking for leading edge damage, top and bottom. we're checking the fabric on the lower part of the wing. And as you can see, when the fuel tank is full, you will get a little bit of fuel dripping out of the fuel vent. That's not uncommon. When I rocked the wing, that kind of precipitated that. This is the static, the pitot-static system here. So these lines run up here. This is pitot. This is static. So you've got these little tiny holes drilled around the side for the static, for the altimeter, and in this case a VSI, and then your pitot is here. Now the wing brace lines, it's not really very effective to do this because they're tied together with this wooden dowel here. So I'll kind of make sure that the dowel is firm. I don't want to yank on it, but I'm just making sure that, that these attach points are secure. And the idea behind these brace lines, they form a box. And together with the end struts here and the end struts here, it makes for a very, very strong wing. So that's the idea behind that. Coming this way, checking the security of the wheel pants, make sure they're not loose. Looking at the tires, what we can see of them. Obviously, part of it you can't see because of the wheel pant. So if you're really wanting to make sure that you inspect fully the tire, you'd have to roll the airplane back or forward and check the tire. We're also looking at the brakes here. There's no leaking hydraulic fluid, no parts that are coming off or fasteners that are coming off as well. Up under here, we've got two exhaust pipes. Now, something that's unique on the Great Lakes airplanes is that the starboard side exhaust pipe is designed to be slightly loose, but the port side is designed to be firm. And the reason for it is because on this side is where the cabin heat comes off. And there is a 25-hour AD that calls for a repetitive inspection on the heater muff. So the reason for that particular service bulletin that calls for checking this to make sure it's firm is because it's related to cabin heat. And actually, you're supposed to look up on side here, and there's an exhaust pipe hanger. It's made of thick rubber material, almost looks like tire material. It's right up in there, and you're checking to make sure that there's no rips, no tears, and that the integrity of that exhaust hanger is intact. So that looks good. While we're here, we will sample the first of 4 fuel drains. Now this fuel drain is related to that header tank that we looked at earlier in the front cockpit for the inverted fuel system. So that looks good. Quantity, or the type of fuel and no contamination. Now the second fuel drain is a gascolator, which is activated up on the oil access door. But before we do that, we'll take the fuel strainer cup and we'll prop it right up in here. It's a little difficult to do this, but there's 2 little lines, an aluminum line and a rubber line, and we can carefully prop this on here so that stays in place. And now we can come up here and open the oil dipstick access door, and we can pull this knob right there and it will drain fuel out of the gascolator. So that looks good. While we're here, we'll check the oil. We got 5.5 quarts, so we'll add a half a quart so we're at 6 before we go flying. It holds a maximum of 8. If you put 8 in it, that last quart will probably end up blowing out the breather tube. So that is secure but not over tightened. We'll make sure that these fasteners are tightened and in line with the wind, and they are. Coming around this way, the air filter is clear. The alternator belt is intact and has a reasonable amount of tension. No bird's nests, no rags, anything up in there. The screws, none of them are missing on the spinner, no cracks. This is a constant speed propeller, so in addition to checking the leading edge of the blade, we're also checking for any leaking oil coming out of the propeller hub, just like you would on any other constant speed propeller. Same thing on this side. So that looks good. And by the way, we've also been checking for fasteners on the cowl to make sure none of them are loose or coming undone. Same thing on this side of the cowl. We'll grab our fuel strainer cup. We'll also check the wheel pant on this side, the tire, the brake on this side. That all looks good. The dowel feels normal, security. Leading edge looks good. leading edge. Fabric looks good here. No wingtip damage. Watch your eyes so you don't poke yourself here with the aerobatic sight. Same thing on the ailerons on this side. Fore and aft, side to side. Fore and aft, side to side. And then we want to check the rod end bearings for the slaving, whatever this is called. Moving them against each other. There's not an unusual amount of slop, just a tiny amount. So that all looks good. And then finally, we've already gotten 2 out of the 4 fuel drains. So the third fuel drain, step up here on the wing. This is for the main fuel tank. And it's located right here. And then the 4th fuel drain is right here. This is associated with this sight fuel gauge. There's a little floating bobber in here. This red indicator indicates that we've got full fuel. That's 3/4, half, a quarter. That is oh crap fuel status. It means you better be on the ground because otherwise the ground is coming to you in a hurry. Just a note that the other Great Lakes that we have in the club does not have the float fuel gauge. It has an electric fuel gauge. So in that case, for that, I would turn the master switch on, and it's located on the same panel as the switches, and that way I could check the gauge. So that's 4 fuel samples that we've taken. I'm going to step up here on the wing, and here's the fuel cap. Now I can actually see and feel with my finger that the fuel is full. And we'll go ahead and dump the sample back in here. Now you could also use a dipstick. If you had less than full fuel in this tank, you could use a dipstick. The challenge is that the way the airplane sits on the ground, the fuel tank is at an angle and the cap is towards the front. So if you have anything less than about 17 gallons or so, it's going to look bone dry. And depending on the ground that the airplane is sitting on, your results in dipsticking the tank can vary pretty widely. So that makes it a real challenge for doing a visual fuel check if you have less than full fuel. However, the sight gauge is pretty accurate. And on the other Great Lakes airplane, the electric fuel gauge has also been shown to be pretty accurate as well. So that's it. That's pretty much a complete circuit around the airplane, and that's checking, all the important things: the fuel, the oil, foreign object damage to the fabric, the control surfaces. That's pretty much it.